So I think one of the things that's the most alarming about what's going on in Congress right now is the way in which the Republican Congress is going at the deinstitutionalization initiative. And my fear here is that, you know, as I say, when I started this work, we had 3 times as many girls as we had women in prison. And that's completely changed. And we have really a handful of girls, especially in public training facilities. But that, I think, could easily be eroded, and you know, because of the work that you've done in Ohio, how much of a pent-up desire there is on the part of some people to have girls locked up for their own protection. And that's really the impetus that the DSO initiative you know, forestalled, but it's always been there. And the fact that we never really developed effective services for girls, I think, has also fueled the kind of backlash, because then people feel like, you know, if families get in crisis and girls run away from home, there's really no place to go for help. Parents get angry, get resentful, judges get resentful, everybody gets unhappy. So the last, I guess, initiative that I have been involved in has been working with states around the country on programming for girls and trying to support the initiatives of a variety of states. Ohio is certainly one, Illinois is another, Connecticut is another, Massachusetts. You know, there are exciting things going on around the country in programming for girls. And I think if we can get those, you know, practitioner initiatives supported and continue to do good research to suggest that we need to talk about gender-specific and gender-appropriate programming for girls, that might be enough to maybe not forestall the damage that Congress is going to do, but to create a kind of a counterweight politically and programmatically in the country. And I would say, and just to end on a positive note, it's been a delight when I've always done work in the community, but in the last year I got involved with the Hawaii Girls Project, and I discovered this incredible reservoir of women who were in various social service agencies who really went through school and were closet, you know, we don't use the word feminist anymore. I know it's not a 90s word, but they are keenly interested in girls' and women's issues. And they are professional women who can't think of a better way to spend an afternoon than to talk about these issues as part of their job. And so I think that's a resource that we have available to us as folks concerned about the girl and women offenders. And that part's been fun, and I've enjoyed it. So I want to end on a positive note. I don't want to sit here and just be hand-wringing about things, but I want to say that I can't think of a better way to have spent the last 20 years of my life. Oh my God, it's been 20 years of my life. And I plan to keep chugging away at this, and I look at all of the panels and sessions now on gender here at these meetings, and I see the incredibly exciting work by the young folks coming to the meetings, and all these, you know, panel after panel after panel. And I think back to the year when we had one, and not just for women in crime, we had one for all of gender. So it's an exciting place to be, and I'm glad that there are, you know, folks coming along and doing exciting work in the same sort of area. So maybe I'll stop there, and we can take some questions. I can certainly ramble on, but I think it's maybe your turn here.
I think that we can all start with just saying that we appreciate the work that you've done with women and girls. It's certainly opened up a field for us, and it's given us the opportunity to add to the discipline. So just like to take this time, I hope I speak on behalf of all of us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki.
Yeah, very fascinating to hear your story, and you know, having just read your articles, to hear kind of how you found your way into this is very interesting.
Yeah.
There's an autobiography.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. You talk about the increased reliance on incarceration of girls and women, and I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about what you would like to see corrections, the field of corrections, look like for girls. What sort of, ideally, what sort of shape would you like to see it take, and maybe how would you suggest heading down that road? How are we going to get there?
That's excellent. That's a very important question, because it's never really been asked. I think with DSO, the failure of DSO really was that when we did deinstitutionalization, I think in the minds of most of the people in Congress, the innocent criminal was a boy. And this was a kind of civil rights issue, and they really didn't think past opening up the doors of the training school. They didn't see a girl's face, and when the first monies were released after DSO was passed, only 4% of the dollars went for girls' services. The other 96% went for essentially delinquency prevention intervention, which translated into boys. And over the next few decades, those monies really became kind of delinquency pork barrel funds. They weren't funds. They were nominally supposed to be for kids who were at risk of state offenses, but mostly, if you would go into any typical state, the people who were in there getting the money were the typical delinquency prevention intervention folk, and they were thinking about programming for boys, even though if you go into some of those programs, you'll see that a chunk of the kids they serve are girls. So girls were really present but invisible in delinquency prevention and intervention programs. So okay, now we take the wonderful quote from Marion Daniels about, well, how do you think about programming for girls? And she said, well, we have to do more than walking into a blue room and painting the walls pink and taking out the urinals. We just got to do more than that. And so that's where I think the work that you've done in Ohio is so important, because I think one of the first things that's important to do is to go ask the kids. And we've certainly just stolen some of your good ideas. We went and asked the girls what were good programs and what were programs that weren't so good, and that they certainly tell us very keenly that the training school where they're bored out of their minds and where there's no programming is not a place they want to be. They also feel very keenly that the boys are getting better food, they're getting more programs, they're getting more options, and they can see that. These are young women who are not stupid. They don't want to be in the training school. Some of them even lied about having drug problems so that they could get into this drug problem program that they kind of liked. I think when we interviewed, this was my two students, when they interviewed the kids, the girls really liked the fact that she cared about what they had to say and that they were being listened to. I think a lot of adults lecture young women, and that's, I think we have that tendency, you gotta do better by you, Nancy, and this is going to be much better. So without even meaning to, I think we fall into this kind of lecturing, hectoring role, and these girls have had a surfeit of that. So I think, I really think that the work on this is now being done around the states, and we are feeling our way into what the programming should look like. One piece of it I know has to be housing. A good chunk of the girls and young women that are on the streets in our country can't go home. And I don't want to put them in a foster care system that we know is as sexually abusive often as their homes. We literally, in many states, have no place for girls. And this is where I begin to even, God forbid, in my dotage, feel sympathy for some of the family court judges. Because they'll say, I have a girl here. She is on the streets. She has no safe place to go. And you're telling me I can't put her in my detention home? I've got to turn her back out onto the streets where she could get, So I understand that dilemma, but I think what it means is we've got to do a lot better job of finding housing for girls. We have to get very comfortable with the idea that they're going to run from that facility, and we have to build that into the program. We can't simply say she's not going to run, we're going to run the perfect program. These girls have gotten into a kind of flight response to any kind of stress, and they are going to run, and we have to get somehow comfortable with that. We have to look at emancipation and employment for young women. Not all girls and women are going to be wanting to go on to college, and they need money and they need employment. So housing and employment, when we did interview young women, one of the things that they know, we always think they need counseling, we always think they need parenting. They have to survive. They need to live somewhere, they need to have money and a job, and they need to have health care. And then I think we can talk to them about, these other issues that we think are important. The issues around drugs, the issues around, what is the sad story here in the girls' lives is that, okay, they're victimized as children, and then it just keeps on happening. It doesn't stop. And they know this. I remember one young woman who had a history of runaway said to me, Meda, there must be like a V on my forehead for for victim, because this just keeps happening to me. And why does it keep happening to me? So I think we got to work on those issues. there are a lot of predatory men out there who recognize these girls are vulnerable and are running a very effective girls programming operation out on the streets, and we have to compete with those guys to get the girls into our programs. So, and the gangs, I think, are doing some of that same stuff in certain neighborhoods. So we have to be better than that. Past that, I mean, I know that we've started working with people who want to work with young women and talking to them around issues about the fact that stereotypically people say, oh, I don't want to work with girls. You know, girls are so complicated. Girls, I just hate. So we're trying to unpack that, What is it about working with girls that's so hard? And then finally trying to figure out if we can find the few women who really love it, to interview them and find out what's going on with them that they would like this population and be drawn to it. And there are those workers around the country. So at this point, it would be a system that wouldn't rely much on incarceration, but like the systems I've seen in Canada and Australia, have a lot more other places for kids to go and be able to survive than we have in the States. When I was in Australia, one of the things that struck me was that they didn't have a youth gang problem to speak of. They kept talking about youth unemployment and youth homelessness. So even the language was kind of a shock. And we have those problems. We just don't talk about them. We just call it gang problem. We call it, street kids. We don't say, why are they on the streets? So anyway, does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. Give other people a chance to.
Well, picking up on the issue you're just talking about, women, when the girls grow up and become women, in a session this morning they started talking quite a bit about decarceration of women, and I was just wondering if you could share a little bit of that with us, and maybe your views on it as well.
Well, that is the other really important policy initiative that I think we need to, as a nation, embark on. There's been a suggestion by the National Justice Policy Institute that we decarcerate nonviolent offenders in our prisons by 1/2 within the next few years. And I would say that we could start with women offenders, and the public reaction would probably not be nearly as it'd be a good place to begin. So talk about looking at the profile of women in prisons. In states like mine, only 15% of the women who are there for violent crimes. So issues of community safety aren't really all that salient with women offenders. So I think it's eminently doable. I'm glad the Division on Women in Crime is supporting that. Certainly all the work that has been done suggests that an organization like the American Society of Criminology should get behind an initiative like that. It's a very important one. And I think, I've said this in talks, and I'll be happy to say it here. I think as the Cold War has receded and the mindless spending associated with that has receded from the public view in American society, it's been replaced by a war on crime that has some of the same kind of mindless spending attached to it. Corrections budgets are the fastest growing budgets of all state governments. There's never been a public discussion of, do we need this much incarceration in American society? What are the implications of this for higher education? I mean, for those of you who hope for jobs in higher education, I hope you plan to be a warden, because that's where the money's going, and that's where the work's going to be. So I think we are at a kind of unique moment in history, and those of us who are concerned about crime and justice issues sort of are uniquely positioned to talk to policymakers and to say, look, there are other choices available to us, and without compromising public safety, which I respect, I think we could be doing a lot of different things with this population and with the male population as well, especially with those who are the drug-dependent folk. So sort of looking at harm reduction issues. So other questions or thoughts?
I guess I could take it in a totally different direction.
Oh, great.
You had just
You
made...
know what? Let's
Okay.
hold on one second. I'm
All right.
Get up to speed here.
No.
And
Can you talk? You want to send me this? I won't drink it. She can't talk. She's lost her voice. She doesn't really always sound like that. Okay. Okay, so are there any other questions?
Well, I can take it in a different direction and ask you this. You had mentioned previously, if you're looking for a career, I hope you're looking to be a warden. I'm sure you're very aware that there aren't many women wardens out there. And one of the things that I'm kind of concerned about in this field is that there's not more attention to women professionals in criminal justice. People like you are very much involved in that. But I'm talking about the field as a whole. I get the sense that some people feel that we've conquered that. Women are now police officers, women are now corrections officers. We don't have to worry about assimilating them into the field. And I wonder if you have any comments on that, on what work is being done, and if you see that as a field that, or an area that really needs to be explored.
Another fabulous question. When I did some work with National Institute of Corrections, I was able to spend a week with some of the most promising wardens in the country, all of whom, well, I shouldn't say all of whom, most of whom were women. And they were opening up these new facilities. And it was an amazing week. These are women, especially the ones in corrections. We can talk, each area sort of has its own unique subculture, but the women in corrections had come up through non-traditional paths to be, you know, they would start as a social worker, a teacher, a telephone operator, or a secretary in a prison. And as the prisons have grown, of course, suddenly bright women who were in these places were suddenly being considered for these administrative positions because they were, you know, they could form complete sentences and they were bright. But they were in male-dominated systems. And again, if we look at the field of criminology and we compare it with the sort of the applied versus the theoretical, you know, continuum that we're talking about, I think there's always this tension. I mean, people want to be more theoretical, they want to be more at more prestigious institutions and those kinds of things. And so when you see the folks who are in the fields coming to our meetings, they often don't see many sessions that are of interest to them, and I think they also feel a little bit left out of the work. And so I have tried in the sessions I've organized. Once I met these women, they were so fantastic. I mean, you talk about charismatic and also ethnically diverse because they've just, you know, there was opportunity there in ways that there isn't in traditional higher education. So I couldn't agree with you more. We could learn a great deal from them. I think we could also open up tremendous research opportunities for ourselves if we were to begin to cultivate those kinds of networks, to bring them to our meetings. I've done that with mixed success. I had one woman who was the head of the program in Minnesota, the Woman Offender Program, come to me. She said, Meda, you know, most of these panels I'm not interested in. So I think if we do bring them to our meetings, we've got to make sure that there's stuff here for them. But are they interesting women? And oh my God, do they have problems? The war stories that I heard that week were amazing. And again, you know, you can start wringing your hands, but then you sit around the table with these women, and they are all survivors in the most fabulous way. So one of the projects that I have never had time to do, Barbara Bloom and I talked about it afterwards, was we should sit down and just do biographies on these women because they're phenomenal people. And they've accomplished a tremendous amount in an overwhelmingly male discipline of corrections. So yeah, that work needs to be done, and I think the bridges, we need to go out to ACA, the American Correctional Association, and they have a women's division within ACA, and we have to keep those doors open, because whenever you walk through those doors, again, it's so refreshing to meet sort of people in a kind of companion field. So I feel that way. And the women in policing, I think, you know, again, some of my, actually my best friend in Hawaii was one of the two women who first broke through in the Honolulu Police Department. You know, she had to pass the male test. This was before, and you know, those are all biographies and histories that nobody's writing. I mean, there's so much work to be done chronicling the achievements of those women. But also the fact of the matter is, if you look at most police forces around the country, we're still woefully underrepresented. We're woefully underrepresented in administration and corrections.
And I think that's so important to keep at the forefront, to keep that in mind, that we haven't made it yet.
Oh, no.
And there's so much work to be done within the institutions to make them friendly to professional women. I guess I see dearth of that kind of research. But from your perspective, you've seen the field grow so much, so it's probably, it is a good sign, I guess, that it's growing. That
Well, actually, this is one of the good things that your generation brings to the discussion, because you come with an expectation that, of course, we're going to be talking about women's issues. And that sense of entitlement is your generation's addition to the conversation. Because, what do you mean we're not talking about this? And what do you mean that's an important thing to bring, because the glass it's sort of a question of if the glass is half full and it's also half empty. And the half empty part is the part you're talking about. And actually, I would say you're right that field, that pile of books on women as workers hasn't grown in recent decades. I would say there was a lot of work done especially around women in policing. And then there was, the history work was done. And then it has kind of languished. And the women in court stuff was really done by women attorneys. And so I would bet if we look at the current set of panels, we won't see much on this topic. And the people like Susan Martin, who were in that field, have moved into other fields. Yeah, so that's a good point. That's excellent.
Do you think that might go along, too? There seems to be, and there was some discussion in the conference here about I don't want to say the decline, but their affirmative action being challenged in many different ways. And do you think that's going to have impact for our positions in a field such as this, and across the board in general, if you're talking about women in workplaces and offenders and all this type of stuff? Do you think that it might have impact for that if things continue to be questioned in the manner that they're being questioned at the time?
Yeah, we can't be naive about these things. You're absolutely right. There's a part of me that just can't imagine that we could start to experience great losses. But then I always have to remind myself not to be naive. And, as you go out and look for that first job, your generation is going to be one of the first ones that will be not hearing what even, all of us heard, which is, you're going to have a little bit easier time because you're a woman or you're a minority. They're going to just say, you're back having to prove yourself. And there's not that little bounce that you can count on of, there might be an EEO officer on that campus saying, well, why, since the department is all male, why isn't there a woman, or, if it's all white, why isn't there a person of color? That question may not be asked. So I'm not going to be reassuring you. I think these are issues that we really are going to have to, unfortunately, refight. I guess we thought we had it, but we can lose things, and I guess we're in the process of losing something very important here, and we just have to strengthen our resolve. And then those of us who are in positions of power and authority, who are senior faculty, have to be very firm with our colleagues that a good department can't all look like me. If I'm white, that's not a good department. I mean, I like myself, but it'd be good to have people a little different from me. So anyway, but I think that's an excellent point. Anything else? Are we?
I'm going to attempt this. But we've discussed this many times before, Meda, in discussing incarceration earlier. I was wondering if you could discuss the nexus between gender and race. And as an African-American woman, I posed this question to you at a conference in D.C., that as an African-American woman, I'm not so much concerned or as concerned with my gender when I'm on an interview. I'm more concerned about how my race is going to be perceived. Am I going to be discriminated on the basis of my race? So I tend to mask my gender issues with my racial issues. So how do African Americans begin to integrate both the race and the gender variable when we're discussing the issues of research on gender, especially considering the war on drugs
That's right.
and the escalation of incarceration rates? So I was wondering if you could speak on that.
Well, as we were talking earlier, when we talk about women's imprisonment, and we talk about the run-up of women's imprisonment, it's been brought forcibly to my attention that we need to be very specific about the fact that the group that has really been disproportionately affected by that is African American women. and it's the issue of the racial injustice of the way we sentence the drug offenders that has produced this enormous run-up. And so to say at once that the women who are in prison are almost all women of color. And you see this whenever you go into facilities. I mean, you can't help but be struck by it. And we have to begin as criminologists to look at the way in which crime and crime policy has been racialized in our country, to where crime is a code word for race, and that racist politicians can go out to white audience and say, you know, I've got a crime policy, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, meaning a racial policy. And it's going to be getting tough on gangs. And I think I heard in Arizona 95% of the kids being processed for gang violence in Arizona were Hispanic or African American youth. So you don't have to say I have an anti-Hispanic, I'm going to have a policy to lock up Hispanic and African American youth. You can say I have an anti-gang policy. So I think caught up in this whole issue of the imprisonment run-up is really, we're back to the eternal question for America, which is a racial question. You know, can we survive as a nation? Can we live together in harmony and with mutual respect, and not this notion that we all have to be the same, but can we get past this history? And so I think part of the historic crossroads that we're at is the same crossroads we were at in 1963 and the same crossroads we were at in 1861, which is, you know, racial policy in America, and can we move forward, or are we going to keep going back? And, you know, so I certainly think, you know, as a woman of color in this country, you have every reason to sit down in an interview and worry about that, and rightly so, because I think, you know, the data very much support the kind of discriminatory experiences that women of color have had, and that people of color have had. I'd like to hold out my own state, although this is always a little bit tricky, as a little more of an optimistic place. You know, I teach at a minority institution. People are always saying, oh, how can you get good students of color? And I said, well, I can't get anything but good students of color because I have a predominantly, you know, my whole campus is people of color. So I have the great privilege of being at an institution that is a minority institution and working with so many brilliant students who are from different ethnicities. And in our state, even though the tensions exist, we you know, Vicki and I have laughed about this, that many of our students have grown up in a place where our outmarriage rate is about 40 to 50%. And when you have that kind of an outmarriage rate, you know, if I'm sitting here talking to Patty, I don't, you know, when I start expressing attitudes about Asian Americans or African Americans, if you live in Hawaii, you really have to watch that, because even if you did know her last name, you wouldn't necessarily know who her husband was, or more importantly, what he was. So, you know, I have lived in a place where, even though we have all our tensions and all our things that we need to work on, I've seen a future where the racial groups can appreciate each other, live and work together in very productive and exciting ways. And so I think America can get past this, but it has to do it very differently than we've done it. We have to start talking to each other. We have to start being friends with each other. We have to start marrying each other. We can't live in our own little separate enclaves and speak across these great divides. So that would be. And we certainly can't keep jailing the people who look different than we do. So I think, is that it? Are we finished? I can't think. Any other questions from the audience?
I can ask another one.